Hi guys, it's Sarah, and today we're going to be talking about the basics of home canning. We're going to start off talking about the gear I use, just the basic equipment that you need, and then we're going to move on to talking about the actual process of canning and what you need to know. First off, there are two different types of canning. There's water bath canning and pressure canning. Now for pressure canning, you need a pressure cooker, and I haven't graduated to that step yet. I don't own a pressure cooker, and right now I don't really see why I need one, but that's not to say I won't do that in the future. But right now all I do is water bath canning, and water bath canning is for high acid foods, so you can't do like just plain canned green beans in the water bath. You need to pickle them or do something like that because it just doesn't get hot enough. With a pressure canner, you can do some more stuff because the extra pressure helps the jars to get hotter, and so you can can a few more things at home than with the pressure canner than you can with the water bath canner. So I'm just talking about water bath canning today, and for most of you who are just starting out, that's probably what you're gonna start with. So the first thing I have is this big old pot. It is 21 quarts, and look, you can see camera in there. Look, there you guys are. So this is a 21 quart pot, and this is actually from the Ball brand. This is really large, and you need a really large pot like this because your jars have to be covered when they're processing. So you need something that's big enough to fit a lot of jars and also deep enough that you can totally cover them with water. So the next thing you need is a rack. And this is mine. It came with my pot actually, and the rack, its purpose is just to keep the jars from sitting directly in the bottom of the pot, because that could cause some issues as far as maybe them cracking or things going bad. So this just keeps them elevated off the bottom of the pot, so you definitely need that. And most racks, or a lot of racks, just sit on the bottom of the pot, but this one actually has a cool feature where it has these little like arms here and these little lips. So what this does is this hook kind of sits on the edge of the pot and holds the rack elevated above the water. So then when it's time to load your jars, you can just easily load them into here rather than having to reach down into the pot to load each one. And then once it's totally full, you just grab these handles and then slowly lower the whole thing down into the water bath. So that's kind of a nice feature. Like I said, you don't have to have one that does that, but this came with my pot and it's pretty nice, so that's what I've been using. Now next up are the actual jars. Your jars are gonna come like this, with the jar, this ring, and a lid. So there's three parts. So when you buy new jars, you'll get all of these parts together. Now the jars and the rings can be reused year after year, as long as, you know, the rings aren't dented or really rusted and defected, and like the jars, as long as there aren't any chips or cracks or anything like that, then you can reuse these year after year. The lids cannot be reused. They're one-time use because the lids have this little sealing compound here, and that's what seals the lid onto the jar. So after that's been used, it's not good to use again. You can buy these separately. So once you have your jars and your rings, if you just need to buy replacement lids, you can just buy these in little boxes. The next piece of equipment that's really helpful is this wide mouth funnel. So it looks like this. And this is great just because it sits down in your jars like this, and that really helps when you're having to ladle things in, like hot liquids and brines, just so you don't have to be quite as precise, and you can move in a way that's a little bit safer because you don't have to worry about stuff splashing around the edge because of the funnel. And the other thing you'll need is a jar lifter. So here is mine, and this is just for when you're lowering the jars down into the hot boiling water, and then when you're pulling them out of the hot boiling water. You need something that you can grab them safely and easily and securely without having to worry about the jar slipping and breaking or you burning yourself. So the way that these jar lifters work is you just lower them on, and they kind of catch here around the neck of the jar, and so it gives you a lot of control. It makes it really easy, and it's much safer that way. So that's my basic canning equipment. There are lots of other different accessories you can get. There are magnetic lid lifters, so you can lift the lids when you're about to put them on the jars with this little wand that has a magnet on the end. It's not necessary, but some people do like to use that. You can buy special plastic spatulas to help get air bubbles out of your jars. I don't have one of those right now. I just use other things I have here at the house, but I think that might be something that I want to look into purchasing because it's really not that expensive, and I think it would make my life a lot easier. And I'm sure there are lots of other accessories and things you can get out there. Have fun with it. If you want to buy those things, it's totally fine, but this is kind of the basic stuff that you need to get started. So first, you want to make sure that you're getting your canning information from a trusted resource. So when you're looking for extra information about the process, as well as for recipes, you're going to want to use ones that come from university resources or local extension agencies, because those things are tested, proven information, and it's just really important to make sure that we're being safe when we're canning, because the goal here is to preserve food so that it's shelf stable. And we don't want to be growing any nasty things that could make us or the people that we love sick, so it's just best to be as safe as possible. There's a lot of renegade recipes out there. There are some methods out there that people use that aren't exactly the safest way to do things, but they've been doing it for X number of years and they've never gotten sick, so they think it's okay. And while that may be true, and it's up to you to make your own choices when it comes to this, I do think it's important to recognize that we want to be safe when we're doing this. We want to use recipes that are trusted. And the reason for this is that there are several elements that go into preserving the food. So canning in the hot water bath with the boiling water and all of that, it helps to heat the food, which can kill microorganisms. And also it pushes air out of the jar so that there isn't any more air in the jar at the end of the process. So both of those things are going to help preserve your food, but those alone can't do it. There are other elements in play as well. So you need a high acid food, because that helps kill microorganisms. And recipes also often contain salt or sugar, because those also help to preserve food and prevent the growth of any little nasty things that might want to be munching on your food and making you sick when it's time for you to try to eat it. So you want to make sure you're not just using, you can't just use your favorite salsa recipe that you make in the summer and then just can it, because the acid level might not be high enough and it might not be safe. Same thing with like your favorite family pasta sauce. Just because it's good to eat when you make it fresh doesn't mean that it's appropriate for canning and preserving long term. So you just want to make sure that you're using a recipe that is for canning and not just a random recipe that you found online that you like to make fresh. It has to be a canning specific recipe to ensure that it's going to be appropriate to be processed and be shelf stable and not make you sick. And another thing when you're looking at recipes to pay attention to is your altitude. So depending on your altitude, that's going to affect how long you need to process your jars. So make sure that you know what your altitude is and where you're going to fall in on those recipes as far as the time. And this is where using resources from your local extension office really helps, because they're going to have recipes that are suited for your specific area. So once you've got your recipe and you figured out what you're going to do, now we need to get into the actual process of getting everything ready. So you're going to want to start by washing your jars and your rings and your lids. Even if they're brand new, you never know what could have gotten on them in the whole process of the production, to the packaging, to the shipping. You just want to make sure that everything's really clean, because that's going to help make sure that your food doesn't go bad. Next, you're going to want to take your big canning pot, fill it about halfway with water, and bring that to a boil. Then once that's boiling, you're going to take your washed and rinsed jars and you're just going to want to put them in that boiling water for a few minutes, and that's going to help sterilize them. Once they've been in the boiling water and they're sterilized, you take them out and you're going to want to let them dry without wiping them with a towel or rag, just air dry. And that helps make sure that they are sterilized. This is also the time when you're going to want to start to prepare your lids. So you want to follow the instructions on the lids that you buy. And usually it involves keeping them in some warm or simmering water, and that just helps make sure not only that they're sterile, but also that the compound on them, that sealing compound, is ready and primed to seal when you put it on the jar. Next, you're gonna wanna get another small pot and fill it with water, and keep that on your stove as well, and start bringing it to a boil. This is water we're going to need later on in the whole process, so it's a good idea to get it started boiling now, so that by the time you're ready to use it, it will have reached a boil and you won't be having to wait around. It'll be ready when you need it. So once you've got all of that going, your jars are sterilized, you've washed everything, you've got your small pot heating up, now it's time to follow your canning recipe. So this is important. Make sure that you're using the exact quantities that are specified in your recipe, because that's going to affect whether it's safe to can or not. Just because that's going to affect the acidity and things like that. So make sure you're being really careful to follow your recipe exactly as it's laid out. Don't make any weird changes or try to throw something in because you think it would be good. Just follow the recipe. Then once all of your jars are full, you're going to want to make sure you're paying attention to how much headspace. And headspace is just the distance from like the top of whatever you're canning to the top of the jar. And this is different for every recipe. Usually it's either 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 inch. So you're just going to want to look at whatever your recipe specifies and do that. And the point of that is to make sure that there's enough space as far as air escaping and things like that. So you want to make sure you're doing the right amount of headspace for your recipe. And also you're going to want to remove any air bubbles. So this is where that plastic spatula, you can use the handle of like a plastic knife or fork, something like that that's not going to nick your jars or crack them. You just shove that down into the edge around the jar and you just push against whatever's in your jar. It just helps to make sure any air bubbles or air pockets that might be in there around the edges or in the food is released, so all that extra air can come to the top. And when you've done that, it might mean that you need to add a little bit more to your jar, because once whatever's in your jar fills in those spaces where the air was, you might need to fill up the jar up a little bit more so you have the right amount of headspace. So once your jars are full, it's time to process them. And the key to successful canning is to really have everything ready to go and prepared right where you can get to it when you need it, so that, you know, in the whole middle of the process you're not running around looking for something or you forgot something. So preparation and planning and just making sure you have everything right there is what's going to make sure that you are successful. So your jars are full. We're going to take that boiling pot of water and you're just going to take like a paper towel or a clean washcloth and you're going to dip that in the boiling water and use that to wipe the rims of your jars. And the purpose of this is to remove any brine or other whatever that might have gotten on the jar depending on what you're canning. And that's just going to help remove any of those residues and re-sterilize that area. And this helps to make sure that our food doesn't go bad, and it also helps to make sure that the lid is able to make a clean seal with the jar. So we don't want anything in the way there. So wiping it off is really going to help make sure that you have a good, nice, clean seal. Now it's time to put your lids on your jar. So you're going to want to center the lid on the jar and then put the ring on. And this is just tightening to fingertip tight. You don't want to crank it and get it as tight as you can, because the point of the ring here is just to keep the lid on the jar while it's processing, so the lid doesn't float away into the water. If you do it too tight, then air can't escape. So we want the lid to be loose enough that air can escape through the process, because that's what part of the canning process does, is it pushes air out of the jar. So if that lid is too tight, then the air is going to be able to come out, and then your lid could buckle, or it could pop off and explode in the pot, or your food might not seal properly. So you just want to make sure that you're tightening it enough to keep the lid on, but not so tight that it's going to be an issue. So now that we've got lids on all of our jars, it's time to get them into the water bath. So you're going to use your jar lifter and lift the jars and place them into the water bath. And then at this time you also want to make sure that the lids are covered. So if you put the jars in and there isn't enough water in the pot to totally cover the lids, you're going to want to add more water. And you want the lids to be covered with about 1 to 2 inches of water, and they need to stay this way through the whole processing time. So once you've got the water in there, the lids are covered, we need to bring the water to a boil. Once the water reaches a full boil, that's when you can start timing based on whatever your recipe says is the right time for your altitude. Now, during this timing process, the jars need to be covered and the water has to be boiling the entire time. So if the water stops boiling in the middle of the process, you're going to have to bring it back to a boil and start the timing all again from the beginning. Also, if the water, boils off and the jars aren't covered, then again, you're going to have to refill the pot, bring it to a boil, and start over from the beginning, because that's the amount of time you need to make sure that everything is preserved properly. And this is where that boiling pot of water comes in handy again. So you want to keep that small pot of boiling water on the stove, so if at any time during the canning process, if you notice that the water is getting a little low and you're worried that it's not going to last throughout the whole time that you're canning your product, then you can pour some of that boiling water into the pot, and because it's boiling, the pot won't stop boiling because you're just adding more boiling water. So it's really important to add boiling water at that step to make sure everything stays going and you don't have to start all over. Once your processing time is up, then you can turn the heat off your pot, and you're going to want to let the jars sit in there for about 10 minutes or so. And this just helps them cool down a little bit and get acclimated to what's going to be their room temperature. Now once that's passed, you're going to use your jar lifter again, pick the jars up, and you're going to want to set them on a hand towel or a large towel if you're doing a lot of jars, on your counter or tabletop. So once your jars have all processed and they're out of the pot, now you've got to play the waiting game. So we've got to let our jars sit there untouched for 12 to 24 hours to finish the sealing process. And this is where your patience comes in. So you're so excited you've done all this, and it can be a little hard, but you just got to sit there and wait. Once the time has passed, you can check your seals. So you're gonna unscrew the ring, which the ring, we don't need that for storing the jar. The ring was just to keep the lid on during the processing step. So you're gonna take your ring off, and then you're gonna wanna push on the lid and make sure it doesn't make that popping sound, okay? Because if it's sealed, it should be totally depressed in and it shouldn't pop up and down. So that's your first test. Your second test is to grab the lid with your fingertips and just see if you can take it off with your fingertips. If you can't take it off with your fingertips, then that also is a sign that you have a good seal. Now, if any of your jars don't seal, you have two options. You can either reprocess them immediately and see if they seal again on the second try, or you can just pop them in the fridge and eat them as soon as you can. That way it doesn't go to waste, but you just can't keep it on the shelf for an extended period of time. Okay guys, so that's it for the basics of canning. If you have any questions about the equipment, where you can get it, or about the whole canning process, if there's something that you still need some clarification on, then definitely leave those in the comments below and I'd be happy to get back to you and help you out with whatever you have questions about. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you liked it, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And also, I have an email newsletter for you guys that goes out every week. I'll have the link in the description. You just go to my website, there's a little green bar at the top, you put in your name and your email, sign up, and that way you just get an email from me every week. And basically what it is it gives you links to everything I've posted in the past week. So blog posts, videos, it's a great way to make sure that you don't miss anything. And you also get some insider information that I might not share in a video or a blog post about me and my nutrition business and other things like that. I hope you're having a great day, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye guys!